So once we found those leaks, we had to kind of work on what we were going to do in order to stop those leaks. And that's where I just kind of kept running into same problem. So over the last month, I've been kind of plugging away with it and made a bunch of changes. So I'm going to go over what got changed, why it got changed, and I think we got a way better design coming up. We worked slowly towards getting to a prototype, and alas, it wasn't going to happen because it kept leaking out the sides, and there was actually some critical errors with the design that prompted me to have to do some major changes. So I spent many hours working on some prototypes that could possibly stop the possibility of anything leaking, but the truth is it just started getting more and more complicated. After a few hours, this was the design that I had come up with from our original insert. As you can tell, there is some intricacies happening inside, so we needed the connection so if the water came down, it wouldn't be able to leave the system. And then to do this, we actually had to create almost another little holder inside the holder. And as I looked at this more and more, I realized I don't think anything like this could ever be injection molded. So I took a little bit of a break and went after one of our designers that helped us with our original design. This is the engineer of one of our original designs, and I was currently working through learning how to do CAD better. He was an expert with CAD, so I was going to pick his brain, and he gave me some books to read and a whole bunch of fantastic information. But during this meeting, I also told him about our new design, and I sent him kind of a quick clip of what we've been at so far. He actually got rather excited, and he sent me a version of his own. Here was the version that he had sent me. Rather simple. The one thing that I really liked about it, however, was this tray was very vacuum formable. Much different than the design I had had. One difference he made too is he created a drain for the tray that would drain back down into the trough, or into the leg rather. This was actually pretty interesting because what it allowed us to do was to keep all of this solid, which eliminated a lot of the leaking issues, as well as we can put a spout in here so that it's guaranteed not to leak there. However, it also created a couple issues. One being that we know with a gap here, more than likely we would have a way of water to leave the system here. The other problem is we want to use both these pieces to run power, and right now his had it as a solid piece. So we'd either have to make a whole nother insert or find some way to hollow this out so we could run power. But the truth was, this fixed a lot of the problems that I was running into before. And that's when I started with a massive redesign. So with a combination of isolation from COVID and Red Bull, I had all the time and energy I needed to fix this problem. To start off, we needed to create something similar to a spout which would sit over our tray. I also wanted this opening to be a little bit bigger so that we knew that we weren't going to have issues with the water not being able to keep up. A few hours later, I had a rough design of a larger opening as well as the little spout that would actually come over the tray, guaranteeing that the water would get in there. Now that we had that sorted out, we needed to make sure that these pieces were the same on both sides, otherwise our different columns would have to be different lengths. And it saves us on manufacturing. So I decided to flip this piece around to see what it would look like. And yeah, it looked pretty stupid. And there's no way I'm running a cord up here, and this is horrible. This looks awful. So we had to come up with a way that we could use both pieces the same on each side. The other issue we were going to run into is if you're going to have a solid piece and then put a spout on the end, you're not going to be able to injection mold that. So we had to design something that would be inserted into this, which would allow this to be cut out so we could run our power on the other side, and then to insert a drain on the other. And that's going to allow it to be injection molded as well, create this piece to be the same for both sides. So we began. We started off by creating our insert. The insert was relatively simple, where it would just push in to grooves that we had made in our power junction, as you can see here, and then line up as needed with the spout here. We still had a bit of an issue where we needed it to come over the tray, but this at least helped us deal with pulling this to make power able to run in on both sides. After that, we were able to replicate both sides, which gave us a much cleaner look, with the hole facing away from the person, so you wouldn't be able to see it. But we still had this issue here, where this thing, A, stopped power from being able to run in, and B, looked stupid. So, what we ended up doing instead was turning this piece into a piece that would slide in and out. The idea being that if you're going to be running power on this side, you don't need your drain, which means you can pull out this inserter where you wouldn't need your drain, put in your riser, and you're going to be able to run power. And this helped a whole bunch of problems. This basically allowed us to run power and then create a small insert that would be used in the event that it was on the side that was draining water, as you can see here. It would leave an opening, if it's not on your power side, for you to run your power cord. This was really clean, worked really well. Now you might be thinking, hold up, Brian, the entire reason why we're redesigning this, the entire reason you went to your engineer and they sent you this new design is because it was leaking from your connections. You haven't done anything to address that issue. To which I say, you're actually right at this point. I've kind of just been getting carried away with the fun of redesigning. But I haven't forgot about you. So after many hours, we got to a point where we had a design that took all of your concerns into mind. And this is what we came up with. So we know we're going to be connecting and water's going to be coming from up top. How do we stop it from water leaving the system? We have a connection that goes inside, like you see here. So the water comes down, it has to leave this spout, right? And that means otherwise it would have to go and fill all the way up here to go over. It's just not going to do that. So this connection is secure. But we also are going to have the issue of, okay, well, what happens to water that does get by? We know those connections aren't watertight. Well, it can go down. This is all a solid piece. And then it comes to this inside square, which you see right here. And then it has to continue going down. It doesn't have a place it can go. It could kind of come up here, but that's not going to be a problem because that's where everything's draining anyways. And then, of course, the column goes over it. So all the water will always be going down here. Our connections don't need to be watertight because they overlap like you see here. And the other really cool thing about the final design that we had come up with is that this insert that you see here, we're gonna go like that, we're gonna hide it. We put some cutouts here, and that's because we need this inside corner, or this inside square like we mentioned from before, that's coming from up top. We need it to overlap our piece here, so when it gets inserted, and then this piece to go and overlap the outside piece. And I know this seems complicated, but the whole idea behind it is that we make it impossible for any water to leave the system. And that's the coolest thing about this new design. Now we put our insert into place, like you see here. Might be a little bit far. Now, because this is all one solid piece, the water comes here, it has to come down here. There's no seams, right? And once it comes down here and this is getting overlapped by our column, all the water comes down. So these connections that we had issues with in the past are no longer a problem. And then with our insert, we made the spout a little bit longer. I 3D printed it so I know that this works, and it sits over the tray. The other really cool thing, just the cherry on top, let's just assume that this is the side that we're running power. Well, if you don't put that insert in, boom, you've got a really large piece that you're able to run a power cord through. Obviously this is on the drain side for this one, but just to show you how big that opening is. So that's really cool. This piece is going to be used on both sides. It has the opening, it has all the drains, everything's watertight. We're off to a fantastic start. Now that we had our water end taken care of, we were able to use this piece for both sides, and we knew that the water couldn't escape our system. As well as it sort of locked in our tray, we really only had one last thing we had to deal with before we moved on to prototyping, and that was finding a way to hold our light. So what we did before was make like a big L. I'm sure you guys remember what the design looked like. And the problem with that is right now we have actually a fairly tall piece, and if we start making things go out and over, we get a very large mold, and that gets really, really expensive. So now that I've gone pretty tall, I don't want to really come out all that far. I want to keep this thing relatively tight because it's going to keep the injection mold costs down a lot. The way I did this is I just built out a little bit of a platform to both hold our tray as well as hold the light, but just barely enough to hold the light comfortably, but not so much that I'm kind of wasting space that doesn't need to be used, that I'm going to be paying for when I make the injection mold. And this was sort of the design concept. You know, it holds the tray into place with this little stopper, and then we just grab the corner of the light. So fast forward many hours, probably a few days later, here was the design that I had come up with. You can see that there's actually a stepper that goes down. It's kind of curved so that it minimizes the amount of space that it takes, but it holds the light just on the corners like you see before. And then be like, okay, well, what happens when this gets pulled away? That light's just gonna fall. Well, that's the cool part, is that because this tray is here, it can't pull out. Right? It locks it in, and it also keeps this from being folded inward because now it's pushing against that light. So it kind of keeps everything straight and from separating, but it does so with minimal pieces. So I really, really like that part of the design. The other thing we did is, the reason we had to drop it is we needed a room for the cord to actually fit underneath and then go into the power end like you see here. I also took that opportunity to make a support that actually hides where our cord is going to be coming in. And that's going to make things even cleaner. So I really like this design. Really, the next step that we have right now is we just 3D print this so that we're able to do prototyping. So that's exactly what I did. On to 3D printing, where we are going to turn this into our 3D print, as you can see here, so that we can eventually make this. And here's the 3D print started. So like mentioned before, 3D printing can be a nightmare. This entirety probably took me around a month, and it was just because of constant problems with the 3D printer, and prints would often fail. You have to start all over again, and there wasn't much dependency, so that's why it took so long for this video to come out. Really not flowing all that hard. It's flowing way harder in the bottom, which shouldn't even be flowing. This means I got bits of a leak. But the leak is staying inside the system, and that is a huge improvement. I'm gonna have to make something to kind of hold these trays, because when it starts to tip, it pulls everything with it. But if I can make that sit nicely in the reservoir, it can't lean, and it kind of keeps everything else straight. And I think I'm going to use the reservoir as a means to kind of center everything, as well as this tray to kind of keep everything straight up and down. But honestly, I'm really happy with this, so this is a real positive sign. So first things first, let's make the edges for our tray. It's pretty simple. We just make a profile and we can just run it along an edge like you see here, and bam, that'll hold it from the back and from the sides. We need to redesign a new reservoir so that it could be vacuum formed, which means that it has to slope. And because it has to slope, now when we put our tray in, we have this problem where our pieces that were straight up and down no longer fit. You can see how it pokes out on the side. So we have to come up with a way that we can have this reach all the way to the bottom without going through the reservoir. So the idea that we came up with was to move this pole inward and just have that specific for the reservoir. That way it can fit inside the reservoir's sloped walls. This just meant changing one piece, so that's exactly what we did. After a couple hours, we got a bit of a design that allows us to have our riser just a little bit overlapped, so it's still taking the weight from above, but snugged in such a way that it's going to fit into our reservoir. Next problem we're going to have is we have to make room for these pieces. So let's do that. The advice that the engineer gave me was to start with your shape and get everything right with the geometry and then hollow it out. And so I did that with this reservoir, which made changing it so that it would fit these pieces so much easier. So then I was able to change a shape where I'm able to insert a chunk here. Then of course I can round it so that it looks nice and clean. And then I can do the same on the other side. And then once everything is looking nicely and I'm able to round everything up and get it the way I want it to look, I then can hollow everything all out at once. And now everything fits perfectly without any issues. While we're here, it'd be nice to have a little bit of a grabber on the side. That way everything is kind of held from the reservoir right to the bottom. As you can see here, it's this one right here, right to the bottom on the side, which means everything that's built on top is going to be solid. Throughout this process, there was hundreds of hours of tweaking and messing around and trying to get things to fit better and openings to be a little bit wider so everything fit nicer. But it all came together after about 2.5 months where we finally had something. Alright, we're just going to test out one layer to begin with. So plug this in. Can we say much better? We'll kind of see how everything ends up panning out, but alright, just had to fix it because it was cavitating. Now we got real water coming out there. That's what I like to see. Almost too much. And it's coming down the other side a lot. Like really well. This is looking really good. Really good. Alright, so this was quite a pain to assemble, but eventually we got it. So we got 3 tiers. This is where we found a lot of problems before. Let's try our luck now. Ooh. Happily flowing right to the top. Definitely seems like the hose came off. So we got way too much water coming up there and there. So we're gonna try this again. Alright, so we got, unfortunately, we're back to some design flaws. The good news is the water is staying in the system for the most part. Once everything is properly assembled, the problem that we're running into is because we have to keep this tension on this hose, it's pushing this piece back up. And that causes the water to just bypass the whole system and then it to kind of drip over. Plus when it's sucked back in, now all of a sudden it's not overhanging this and then it starts to drip. You know, it can basically drip underneath. So we don't want that, obviously. The good news is I do think we've solved the water issue when everything is assembled. The bad news is there's going to be some more tweaks. And that probably means like another week before doing another test. I was actually pretty hopeful about this one. But we found some pretty good information that we're going to have to work from. So that's all we can hope for. Alright, to get a better idea of what our problem is, is that we have to connect this hose for every layer. So what's happening is you don't want too much slack at the top here. And that's because anything extra, you're gonna have to push back down when you try and put this piece back into here. So now I'm gonna try and push it back in, and I don't have a whole bunch of extra slack, and you might have seen it actually popped this out on the other end, right? And this was a problem I was running into, is there's just too much tension, and it wants to pull itself out, as you can see here, right? The problem is when it pulls out, now all the water is going to be trying to go around it, and so this was making this so difficult to assemble, why everything was sort of taped together. So I think, and the other problem is when this gets pulled in from the side, like you see here, now the water can actually drain behind your tray, and we don't want that, right? That's what we're trying to avoid. So I think what we're going to do is actually take and make this into a hole. And then we can run the hose up and down it, and it's not going to be pushing up on it in the same way it is right now. And that's the plan. Nothing too fancy here. We're just going to basically flatten the top so that we have something to work with, and then center a hole in. Now we just have to 3D print to replace these, and we're good to go. Alright, so now we've replaced all the inserts with the ones with the holes. We're going to try it 3 levels again, just to see. Things came together way better, but it's a little wobblier, I find, so we'll see. Already a really nice start, to be honest. Nothing's leaking. I just do a quick sort of loop to the other sides. Not leaking, leaking, so that's a huge improvement. Oh, this is so much better. Alright, should start draining right away. Yes. And then there we go. Draining all the way to the bottom. This is looking way better. Tied this pole just to try and keep everything straight. I'm probably going to do something similar to that in the real design. Really our problem is our pump just isn't quite strong enough to pump this high. So I think we're going to have to try this test with a bigger pump and see if that makes a difference. Alright, so it's probably one of the coolest things about having a 3D printer and kind of playing around with CAD is this pump that I bought didn't come with a fitting to go on top of here. It's kind of a pain because I need something rather specific. So what's really cool is I can actually 3D print, well, I can design something with threads and 3D print it. So I did this to test to see if this is going to fit, and it ended up fitting fantastic. And then I modified it so that I can now hook up a hose to it, gave it some little grips. It's kind of hard to see. Little grips. And now I can actually just screw that on. And that's something I 3D printed in an hour. A specialty piece so that now if I need to hook up a hose, it's hard to do with the left hand, boom, now it's got a hose on it. I didn't need to get any specialty parts. It cost me, in plastic, probably 10 cents, and it took an hour to print. And that is the coolest thing about having a 3D printer. Alright, so now we got a beefier pump. We'll just try it with the last layer not quite as high, and then we'll set it up a little bit after, but let's try this out. Now we got a serious pump. Way too much water now. Water's not a problem. A little loud though, holy cow. Alright, and second level's plenty of water. Third level, plenty of water. Actually, because it's pumping so much water, well, you can't really see it. It's pumping so much water, it's actually not able to drain it fast enough. Well, I'll play around with this a little bit and just see. We needed a way that we could control the flow of the water from the pump. It was just pumping a bit too hard, so I thought, hey, let's try and 3D print another specialty part. In this case, we're going to try and make a throttling valve. And they're pretty straightforward. We're just going to need a box. We're going to put threads in it because that's where we're going to screw in the top part that's going to throttle. And then let's just cut out some holes and feed the holes through. Then remove the material we don't need. Round it off so it looks kind of pretty, and then we can start on our second piece. So this is going to be the piece that screws in to reduce the flow. Put threads. We're going to cone it because we actually coned the first piece. Put some handles. Round it off a bit more. Kind of found that the handles were not quite long enough. Get it into position so now that it fits our valve and we can do an analysis, we can kind of see exactly how everything is going to look on the inside. So you can kind of see how it tapers in. We screw this in and out, and these obviously have holes going right through, and that allows a little bit of fluid to come through if we want it to, or less fluid if we want it to. So if we move this up, you can see how when we move it up, now the water has a path to flow. When we move it down, obviously it reduces the flow. Pretty straightforward, but really cool, the fact that a person can actually 3D print this if they wanted to. So that's the challenge. We just wanted to clean up a few things so the hoses fit nicer, and why not make it look pretty with colors. Alright, so 3D printed that little valve. Had to tape it because it was leaking quite a bit, but it seems to work pretty good. So we'll do kind of another test. Might just pinch this off to start off. And then, as you can see, it's probably giving a little bit too much water. So then, if we go here, I'm going to turn this to close it just slowly by closing this a bit. And now it's a little more reasonable. And of course, everything's looking great. Still might be a little bit much because it looks like it's dripping because it can't drain fast enough here. I can turn this. And look at that. Water almost stops. So that's pretty cool. So I can just tweak it a little bit. And now everything's pretty much better. With the right flow, which means that these, once it catches up, we can give it a little bit more. So that's really cool, actually. I can kind of control the flow a lot better. I actually think we're getting close to a point where we can try a full scale. Yay! Finally. So we got so much done in this episode. I think we're finally at a point where we can do full scale. Obviously, we're probably going to find new problems, but it's just nice to see the progress rolling along. So sorry for the wait. I know it's been about 3 months since the last upload. It was just hard to know when a guy should upload or if we should just leave this into the next video. I'm glad I waited. I think this video had way more content than normal, and yeah, thanks so much for watching, and I can't wait to see how this ends up turning out. Thanks.